Okay, so we're here to discuss my granddaughter and Joy's daughter. We're going to call her Lizzie. We decided that we had to reveal that she's a part of our family because the story is so personal for me and for my daughter. So let's start out. Joy, you just tell whatever you want about the beginning of Lizzie's life.
So I met Lizzie on her first birthday. She is adopted through foster care. Um, that was actually a really special thing to get to meet her on her birthday. And then the first time she came to visit me was a few weeks later on my 35th birthday. And so it was nice to have those birthday connections. Um, she came to live with me full time, 14 months old. She was born at 28 weeks gestation, so 3 months premature. And at birth, she had a stroke, which later at 2 years old was diagnosed with cerebral palsy, which was very mild for her. But the implications of what that meant for her life, we didn't know exactly how mild it was going to be until she got older. Like she didn't start walking until she started physical therapy at 18 months old. And she had to learn how to jump at physical therapy. She struggled to learn how to pedal a bicycle and things like that. But back in 2020, she did learn how to ride a bike independently, even without training wheels, which was something that I didn't know that she would ever be able to do. But the girl was determined and decided that she wanted to do it. She's a very self-motivated learner in that at physical therapy, they would just teach her what to do, and then she would come home and just do it every day on her own almost. I set her up with the types of activities at home for her to be able to explore her body well, like having a beam on the floor for her to walk on and having stepping stones for her to practice her balance with. And we had a little bicycle that stayed inside the house for her when she was a toddler to practice her pedaling all the time, no matter what the weather was like. Um, just really trying hard to make sure that she had all the tools that she needed to flourish and thrive in whatever she was motivated to accomplish. And she really has. She's been an impressive young lady.
Very strong-willed child.
Very, both for the good and the bad.
So Joy and I did quite a bit of fasting and praying for her when she first came into our lives. And we had a significant breakthrough on the day of her adoption when it became legal that she was ours for keeps. You want to tell about that?
So today is actually the ninth anniversary of our adoption. And that's actually a pretty cool thing to be celebrating today. Um, so 9 years ago today, she had already been living with me for a year and a half. So she was about 2.5 years old. And she was able to talk at this time and she was able to communicate pretty well and stuff. But I think that because in her young life journey, she spent her first year living with another foster family without me. And so, like I said, I met her on her first birthday and she didn't even come to me until a few months later. That first 12 months that she was outside of the NICU, she was living with another family. And then suddenly she's picked up from that life and placed in our life. And that was really hard for a toddler to process, that kind of a change and shift in her life. And she struggled with connecting with me as her mom, even though I know that she wanted to. But on the night of the adoption was the first time where I believe that in her spirit, she felt that freedom to say, I can settle in, that this is my mom, that this is going to be. And she crawled into my lap that night and told me she loved me for the very first time.
That had to have been spiritual because she was too young at the time to know what adoption meant.
Mhm.
And so it wasn't a mental, like now I'm adopted.
Yeah.
that day, we they formalized the adoption in the judge's chambers. I think it was about 18 family members showed up that day. We
Lots of
all
fun.
crowded in. The room was designed to hold about 7 or 8, but we were standing around the wall, and we it was a quite a celebration. And as soon as the celebration was over, we left the courthouse, and Joy and I and the children were in the back seat of the car, and Joy and I just began to declare all the things that we felt like until the adoption was legal, we could not legally declare. And but we sure let it rip in the car that day. It just felt like the car was shaking in the spirit as we were like, now we say, and now we declare, and now. And it was a really a powerful moment. That legal standing was established in heaven and on earth, and it was awesome. Okay.
Yeah, we broke through generational issues from their bloodline, ones that we don't even know, and we brought them into our generational blessings as well.
I have a tradition in my family. I have 12 grandchildren that on the day they are born, I take a gold coin to the hospital and give it to mom and dad for this child as a symbol that you're included into the wealth of our family with the generational blessings. And that day, I handed Joy, I didn't give it to Lizzie. She might have tried to swallow it, but I handed it to her mom and saying, she's included in the generational blessings of this family now. Joy, you want to talk about the first 2 or 3 years when there were a lot of tantrums and fits?
So those were some really rough years for me because I was a single mom alone with two little kids. They are only 14 months apart in age, so they're very close in age, and especially if you consider Lizzie's gestational age, they're actually a lot closer, like less than a year apart. Um, so Lizzie struggled a lot with tantrums, and they were not just like, I want something and mommy won't give it to me. It was this overwhelming emotions that she doesn't know what to do with. And so she was flailing on the floor, tantrums as a toddler and young child that went all the way through age 4. And it would be like an hour long tantrum 2 or 3 times a week where I'm literally just holding her tightly in a bear hug to stop her from hurting herself or hurting others or destroying things. And it was really tough. It was very emotionally draining for me. It was emotionally draining for her, exhausting. That we kind of felt like we were in the fight for our lives at the moment, and let alone the fact that I'm stressed about thinking about what is little sister doing, is she okay? What is she up to, kind of thing, and her stress levels as well. So it was a very, very difficult time because there were just so many big emotions. She didn't know what to do with them, and they came out in a tantrum like a toddler, young child would do.
So around that time, Joy asked me, is there anything that I could do to help in the spirit realm? And at the time, I didn't know about communicating with her human spirit, but I did know how to bring people into the presence of Father God. And so I did what I knew to do. One night when Lizzie was asleep, I went to her in the spirit. I picked her up out of her crib and I took her to Father God. And when I brought her to Father, he was sitting down. When as we walked up, he stood up. It was a place of honoring her. He stood up And he reached out and she reached out her arms and he took her into his arms. And he sat down with her in his lap and he said to her, I knew you would be back. And that just kind of undid me because I was feeling his emotions as much as her emotions. How much when he sends his kids off into time and space, into the earth, it is with a great hope and expectation that we will be back. And that was her choice in the spirit. I didn't know that at the time, but I know it now. Because, like I say, at that time, I didn't understand the workings of our human spirit. I didn't even have a theology about that. But when they were sitting together and they were talking with each other, one thing she said to Father was, it's harder to love Joy than I thought it would be. And I recognized from that she signed up for this, that before she was sent by Father to earth, she knew and she agreed with it. And Father said to her, give it some time, it will happen. Okay, after that, what was
And
the
it has
difference?
it has happened. This girl, she just comes and she's 11 years old and she'll still crawl into my lap and just cuddle in for a hug. You know, how many preteens do you know that still do that? And she's very connected with me. She's very attached to me. Um, and I see that her natural inclination is to withdraw when she's feeling upset or uncertain and around new people. But with me, she doesn't do that at all. She opens up and she's vulnerable and she trusts me. Um, and that was hard won because I don't believe that she was always like that, you know. But she is like that now. So that girl has definitely gotten her heart where she wants it to be with me.
So we're going to fast forward now several years um, to water baptism. We as a family, I did not understand the power of water baptism until I knew it was powerful because I'd seen the effects, the change, the sudden shift in people, even though they had been Christ followers for years. When water baptism happened, suddenly they were free when before they were not free. But I didn't know the theology of it until I met Arthur Burke and he pointed out to me Romans 6. When we are water baptized, we are crucified with Christ. And that means we're killed. So water baptism is when we die, when the old person dies and the new one is resurrected. And when we understood that, we also understood that all of the critters and the devices and structures that the enemy has surrounded us with and put inside us can't cross through the water. And it explained why when people would come up out of the water, they would be free of addictions and all. I had witnessed it firsthand, but unless you understand, like Arthur said, unless you can verbalize the earned authority you have, you can't execute it. And when I understood that, we all as a family we water baptized ourselves together in a hotel swimming pool. We just wanted the full effect. It was in dead winter, but we were serious. And when Lizzie was water baptized, she had a habit of whenever she would pose for a picture, whenever I would try to take her picture, she would pose with puckered lips like she was going to kiss you. And it was just the way she presented herself to a camera. But that night, when we were all water baptized, that was the last time I saw that look in her face or that behavior or that action. And some of that was just totally gone. Okay, so now let's talk about talking with her human spirit. Arthur had taught me and opened up the teaching of communicating with my human spirit. I knew from things I had experienced that my spirit was active and I was able to relate to my spirit, but I did not know I could actually have a conversation with my spirit. And when that opened up, and so many miracles started happening in my own life to set me free from things I had struggled with all my life and knew no way to get out of, even though I had done everything I knew to do, I began to see, wow, if this can happen to me, what will it do for others who've been stuck in things they couldn't get free from for decades? So I asked Arthur about Lizzie and what we could do to help her behavior and her learning. Joy, you want to start by just telling us where we started. What was the starting point at that time?
Well, of course, we had dealt with the tantrum, so we weren't dealing with that anymore, but we were struggling with school, getting schoolwork, just learning, explaining the same thing over and over and over and over and over 100 times, and it's still not clicking. Um, we were struggling with uh, meanness to her sister and picking and bullying her sister some. Um, those were the two primary things, were school and her behavior towards her sister. That it was just, there was no love lost kind of thing, and it was starting to do significant damage to little sister's demeanor and her self-esteem. And it was starting to put, like, even little sister was starting to take on this attitude of, I deserve to be bullied, and she was starting to encounter bullying in other parts of her life, you know? And so I recognized that that was starting at home. And I had tried all the conventional and non-conventional ways of dealing with that I could think of. And traditional parenting, gentle parenting, conversations out the wazoo, trying to get her to just calm down and see what she's doing, you know? And it was just not happening. It was not working for her.
So Arthur gave me some instruction about how to communicate with their spirit. First thing he told me is with children, it is so easy. With adults, they have all this mental stuff to face first. Children don't have that. And he said he has never met a child who didn't know they had a spirit, whereas adults kind of argue the point. Um, and he said, just keep it casual and natural. And for the children, it will be. He said also, expect that they know things that their brains, their minds, their souls don't know. Like when he said, would you look at the occipital lobe of your brain? A child won't know what that is, but their spirit says, sure, it looks like this. They know. They have vocabulary. They have language that came from heaven with them, prepackaged in them. And I've discovered since then that I can have a conversation with the spirit of a baby in the womb and their spirit communicates just fine with me. It's just phenomenal how our spirits come from heaven with God in them, with the nature of God, with the design of God. Package deal, whole, better off than sometimes our spirits are when we're 75 years old, because it's not tarnished by the woes of this world. So what I did, um, Lizzie was at my house, and I just casually, we were in the middle of just messing around, and I asked her, Lizzie, may I speak to your spirit? And she said, sure. And I was a little shocked by that because when I tried to speak with the spirit of adults, we had this theological discussion first. And Arthur was right. It's just so easy for the kids. So I asked her, Spirit, would you be willing to talk with me? And just right out of her mouth, she said, of course, I will talk with you. And I said, would you look at Lizzie's brain and see if there's anything about her brain that's just not right? And Lizzie got very still for a moment. And that's not like her. Usually she's constantly, or it wasn't like her then. She was about 8 years old at the time, 8.5. She was constantly on the go. And her spirit said, kinda between the ears, there's a mass. It's mostly on the left side, but some of it is on the right side. And it's like a ball of wires that are all mixed up, tangled together. I don't know if Lizzie had ever seen or knew there was an MRI of her brain taken when she was in NICU, but she had identified exactly where the stroke was. And that's when my faith went zoop. Wow, we're not just playing games here. This is real. And so I asked her, Spirit, would you ask Jesus to come and heal that part of her brain? And she said, yes, I can do that. And so she went into this calm state, almost like a trance. Her eyes were closed, and she just sat there for the longest time. There was a holiness around us. There was the awe of God. It was such a reverence, a reverential, holy moment. I was afraid to speak. It's like when God is so present, you don't say anything. And I waited. I don't know how long it was, but it was some time. And then she said, Jesus is gone. He sat beside me. I watched him sew together, knit together the wires in that area. He sewed together a lot of them, not all of them. And then he sprinkled some gold, and then he left. And Arthur had coached me to ask her to build a shortcut around from the left hemisphere to the right hemisphere. And I asked her, until that area completely heals, would you be willing to build a workaround, a shortcut from the left side to the right side so both sides of the brain can communicate? Like if one road is blocked in your neighborhood and you have to drive around it to get to another part of the neighborhood, you have a detour around that area. And she said, sure, I can do that. And I'm thinking, This spirit has watched Jesus knit a brain together. She knows how to do that now. And so she got quiet for a few more moments and she came back and she said, "It's done." So then I said, "Next time Lizzie does math, could you help her do math?" And she said, "Sure, yes, we can help her." So I want to show you some screenshots here. So this is a screenshot or a photograph of Lizzie attempting to do math. Joy, you want to tell us about this?
So we were trying to add numbers, multiple digit numbers, like 2 digits or more. And she got the concept of adding, but in her writing, she could not get the columns to stay straight. And so I even brought out some graphing paper. I drew lines for her to keep her numbers in between. And even with all those guidelines, literal guidelines for her, she still could not keep everything organized and laid out to where it would make sense for her to be able to do the addition. And you would end up with things just all over the place. And I would like even draw the lines all wonky so she could see this is a wonky arrangement of organization, not the way it's supposed to look. And so she just could not get it to come out straight and organized.
So this picture was taken the day before we prayed. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Later, I talked with an educational psychologist and I showed her this picture and she can tell, she said, "I know exactly what's going on here." She can't communicate. Her left and right side of her brain cannot communicate. And she said, to do math, you have to use the left side of your brain to manage the numbers and the right side of your brain to manage the visual on paper. And if they're not working together, this is what you get. So now I'm going to show you the day after we prayed. This is just 2 days later. Joy, you want to talk about this?
So it was a night and day difference. She was able to use the guidelines of the graphing paper and keep her numbers within the boundaries that they were supposed to be. The numbers were lining up. She was finally able to start adding the digits together. And it was just finally starting to get to where she could manage enough to where she could start to learn. And now she can do long division and long multiplication and all that stuff. She still struggles with it from time to time, but not with that.
That was the day after.
Yep. Less than 48 hours.
And the astounding difference we saw was such a faith builder for Joy and me. I thought, oh my God, if you can do this, we probably, Lizzie and I probably spent only 10 or 15 minutes together. If you can do this in such a short time with such a astounding difference, what more can you do? And I said to the Lord at that time, if I spend the rest of my life helping children with learning disabilities like this, my life will be well spent. I sign up for it. Because so many children are so stuck in these traps they don't know how to get out of. And there's such simple solutions that work so astoundingly well. What more is there for us that we don't even know to ask for? This was in March when she was 8 years old. She was middle of second grade. Tell that story, what happened that summer with academics.
So she was in second grade and we were homeschooling. I ended up switching her curriculum, and in the switch, I switched her to third grade. And that girl just started thriving and worked hard and completed an entire third grade math curriculum in the spring and summer. And that was just like when we were going from what you were just looking at in the first image to doing an entire math curriculum in just a few months, that was incredible.
And the Georgia State Achievement Scores in June.
So in June, she got a 79th percentile. Was that what it was
Mhm.
in math?
Mhm.
Which was much higher than I expected.
And
But the girl is just doing well
that was end of 3rd grade.
in the third grade. And she
And
basically did second and third grade in 1 year. So,
it wasn't it was from mid-March to mid-June, same year,
mhm.
right?
Yep. Yeah,
Yes.
so she started out struggling with second grade and ended up thriving in third grade by that summer.
Ye yes, and mid-June, when she took those achievement tests, overall was 83 percentile for 3rd graders. So she took the summer off from academics and then started 4th grade with her peers in the fall and has stayed right with grade level since then. We saw the difference in academics. So I went back to Arthur and I said, okay, now we want to address fine motor skills. What can we do for that? And he said, well, that's the cerebellum, which is in the back of the brain, and the pons is in the middle between the cerebellum that controls communication between the left and right hemisphere of the brain. And the problem could be the cerebellum, or most likely it's the pons. And so I sat down with Lizzie again when she was at my house and asked her, may I speak to your spirit? I asked her spirit, would you look at the back of the cerebellum and the pons and tell me if you see anything that's out of order? And her spirit said yes and looked at the pons and she said, it looks like a ball with the top half missing. And Arthur had coached me, it's supposed to be in a sphere, and it'll be a bad shape, odd shape, or some missing if there's a problem. I didn't tell her spirit that, but her spirit told me. So she invited Jesus to heal it. And again, Jesus came and did a partial healing and then left. And her spirit told me that's what happened. And so for the next 5 days, I would call her on the phone and ask her, Spirit, would you look at the ponds? Is it whole yet? It's growing, but it's not there yet. And I call the next day, it's growing some more, but it's not there yet. 5 days later, and Arthur had told me it will probably take about 5 days for it completely grow to full size. On the fifth day, she was at my house and I asked her and she said, it's full now, it's whole. And he had told me, don't try to activate it until it's whole. And she said, let me draw you a picture. So she got pencil and paper and she drew this picture. She said, there's this left cerebellum, the right cerebellum, and the pons. God is here, God is here, and God is here, and it's all good. So we prayed for God to activate the pons so the left and right hemispheres would coordinate and work together. Joy called me about 2 weeks later. Her right hand was affected by the CP, and she couldn't pick up anything with fine motor skills. Even eating with her fork was very difficult for her to do. And here she picked up those fingernail clippers and is clipping her left hand for the first time. She could use her left hand to clip her right fingernails, but this was totally beyond her to use her right hand to clip her left fingernails until her fine motor skills started returning quickly. And then she took gymnastics. She's wearing black tape on her weak leg. I wish we had the before, but to do this is truly a miracle. remember Joyce saying that she put boards on the floor, trying to help her learn to walk on a board lying down on the floor. But look at her on this balance beam. This is a miracle.
Her first times on that balance beam, she would fall within the first few seconds, get up, fall, get up, fall, get up. She got up back on that balance beam more than any other kid. And to me, that was just amazing that she was learning to pick herself up every single time she fell.
So her strong will, God created her with strong will because he knew she was going to need it. And that persistence that she is not a quitter. Okay, now the OT. Go ahead.
So Lizzie, of course, has been in not occupation, the physical therapy since she was 18 months old, which is when she first learned to walk, and they taught her to jump and all kinds of things. But during this time, they, of course, take evaluations every 6 months to see where she is, to justify insurance and all that stuff. So they did an evaluation on her, and in all of her uh, testings, her scores, she was coming up about, what was it, about almost 3 years behind in age. Is that what it was?
She
Yeah.
she tested at 5 years old and she was 9 at the time.
Okay, so I think it was like 5.5, but yeah, so about 3.5 to 4 years behind in age, appropriate abilities for um, bilateral coordination, balance, strength, and all that stuff. Her strongest one, of course, was strength because she was a very strong kid. But even that was still behind. So then her mom did the prayer with her in between two evaluations. So at this one evaluation, she was testing 3.5, 4 years behind. And in the next one, in just one area, and all the other areas, she showed about 6 months of worth of growth, which is appropriate because of the intervention that she was getting from the OT and stuff, trying to keep her at least caught up with where she is so she wasn't losing ground. But in the one area of bilateral coordination, she developed 7 years worth of growth to where she was actually testing at 9 years old, 9.5 years old, as a 12-year-old in bilateral coordination by itself.
And it was
Seven,
the bilateral coordination that we had specifically addressed with healing the ponds.
and that's tested, documented. It's part of her medical record. That will never be different. And I even asked the physical therapist about that later. It's like, is that normal? Like, have you ever seen that happen before? She's like, in her 20-something years of being a pediatric physical therapist, she had never seen anything like that before.
Okay, we want to talk about AHSs and how they played in with her behavior. And then we want to summarize by talking about overall what we've learned from this process that can be applied with any child anywhere.
Can I say a few things first before you move on?
Of course.
So one thing is whenever I would ask to speak with her spirit, whenever we were dealing with a behavior or something like that, I would just simply, not in the heat of the moment, never, because I never wanted her to associate that with a consequence or a discipline issue or anything like that. So it'd always be at a completely separate time when everybody's calm and diffused and whatnot. I would say, Lizzie, can I speak with your spirit? And as soon as I would say that, she'd go, yeah. you know, she'd get this really like sweet look about her face and kind of tuck in a little bit. And you knew immediately that you were speaking with her spirit, that this was not the normal Lizzie that I talk with and interact with every day, but it was specifically her spirit. She's like, yeah, you can talk to me. Very, very sweet. And then about the education as well, even just last week, she was struggling with some number theory, with counting backwards, and something that she's always struggled with. But she was struggling to count backwards from 48, and I asked her to go check on those connections, the wires that had been repaired, And she said that they were jumping and dancing and basically acting agitated. And so we asked, what can we do to help calm those down? And we started doing some crossbody exercises. And it was something as really as simple as touch and tap crossing over your midline. And we did that for about 5 minutes. And then we started doing the counting backwards again, and she was able to do it. And I asked her to check on those wires and see what they looked like, and said they were calm and peaceful again, and things were able to flow again. So even though she had conquered that one spot, it still required a little bit of maintenance when she's getting frustrated and stuff like that, just to say, hey, go check on it. What's going on? Let's stay on top of it. And that has made a world of difference still.
And I must add that after we prayed for the cerebellum and the pons, we immediately started doing the crossover exercises because they're important to build up those connections between the left and right hemisphere for fine motor skills and also for the brain. And she developed some dances. She loves to dance. And she developed some fun country music type dancing for the crossover exercises and was doing them daily for a few months. And then um, now we recognize that it's helped ongoing too. Okay, so AHSs. An AHS is an alien human spirit. That's a human spirit in the wrong place at the wrong time. um, an alien human spirit, we would call them ghost. Um, they sometimes live in houses or cemeteries or wherever they happen to be. And they also sometimes are inside our own human spiritual realm in our bodies. And because Lizzie spent 3 months in NICU at a time when she was, her biological mother had given her to the state the day after she was born, and she didn't even have a representative in the foster care system until she left the hospital. So for 3 months, first 3 months of her life, there was no one to protect her. And in a hospital where there's a lot of deaths, it would make sense that she was vulnerable to a lot of AHSs finding a body that they could rest in. We don't know why they're trapped there in Earth, time, and space, why they don't return to eternity immediately. We just know it happens. It's easy to deal with an AHS who wants to go. Most of the time they do want to leave, they just don't have a way out. They're stuck, they're trapped. And when you offer them a way to leave, to return back to eternity and their creator, they're quite happy to go. Sometimes they're incapable of leaving because there are evil guards holding them in place because evil entities don't have the spiritual energy that humans have. So evil critters will suck and drain energy from humans, dead or alive, even the dead human spirits, where their bodies are dead, the spirits are still alive, still have energy that critters can suck off of. So for all those reasons, an AHS in a building or in a body can interfere with true life, with real life. And it's such an easy fix to deal with them if you just have the courage to try. And and to recognize that this could be a problem and to check that box, is this an AHS that is giving us this behavioral or learning problem with a child? It's such an easy fix. Okay, so the first time Joy asked her spirit, is there anyone present that doesn't belong to Lizzie, that God didn't put there? And her spirit said, yes, there's a tall woman that hates us and a little girl, and the tall woman hits us a lot. And so Joy said, "Is it okay if I speak to this tall woman?" And she asked the woman, "Would you like to leave?" And the woman said, "Yes, I would like to leave." And so Joy said, "I opened the silver channel." I remember Lizzie intervened at that point and said, "What's a silver channel?" And she was thinking a TV channel. And Joy described it as a path. And her spirit said, "Oh, you mean that blue river?" Yeah, okay, that's it. And she said the blue river just opened up, and she said there's a golden castle in the distance. And so she asked the tall woman, "Would you be willing to take that blue river?" And her spirit watched as the woman stepped into the blue channel, the blue river, and walked away and disappeared in the distance. And that day, the hitting abruptly stopped, just immediately. It was gone, as though it had never been there. A few months later, uh, Lizzie and her sister were with me at my house, and Lizzie was, every time Lizzie would be corrected, she would drop to the floor, just like go limp on the floor as her act of defiance of being corrected. She just flopped to the floor. And we had just watched that and tried every way to correct that behavior, but couldn't correct it. And that day, the thought dawned on me, that's not Lizzie. And so I pulled Lizzie aside away from her sister. We sat down in private and I asked her spirit, "Was that you that dropped to the floor or was that someone else?" And her spirit said, "That was the little girl." And I'm thinking, well, of course, there were two AHSs mentioned at the beginning. We didn't make the connection that the little girl was still present. So we opened the silver channel, the little girl left, and from that day forward, Lizzie never dropped to the floor as a defiant act of being corrected. I've just got to pause here and praise God and thank you, Jesus. We are so grateful. We are in awe, Father, of what you have done to help this child, her sister, and all the other children that you have helped to become normal children in normal environments with behavioral issues resolved and learning disabilities resolved. You are amazing. So now, Joy and I just want to summarize with what we think we've learned. And I would like to start with Joy's defiance attitude that these children are gifts from God and are not here as problems but as blessings. And I think that fundamentally has got to be the mindset of any educator, parent, or any steward of a child, that they have to know that they know that they know that that child is sent by God with a divine destiny to represent God. Joy, you are so good at that. Help us see that.
Well, I can tell you it doesn't always feel that way. That there are times where I'm like, man, I signed up for this, you know. But one thing, especially when I'm speaking with them or I'm speaking about them, it's this, I'm going to speak to the way that they were designed. And I'm going to see them the way that God designed them and ordained them and created them and call that out of them so that anything that's getting in the way is treated as something that's in the way and not as who they are and as part of their identity. That a lot of my focus in correction and consequences and stuff like that, that if it ever gets to a point where they're taking on an identity of, oh, I always do everything wrong and things like that, that I was like, nope, we're not doing that. That's not who you are. That's not who you were created to be. And you were created to be this kind, loving person who is full of peace, calmness, self-control, love, all the fruit of the spirit, that's who you were created to be, and that is who is normal for you. whether we are experiencing that or not, that is what is their normal. And that I will always speak to them in that manner. And I will always make sure that other people are speaking to them in that manner as well. That everything that we do is with the goal of honoring her and never violating her or her spirit or her trust or her relationship. That everything is done in a way that is going to build her rather than tear her down. And we even talk about that with the way the kids speak to each other. Like, are you building your sister up or are you tearing her down? And they'll be honest with me. They're like, well, I was tearing her down. I was like, well, what can we say instead? You know? And it is just about recognizing that this child is my sister in Christ, that she's not just my daughter, but she's also my sister. And I'm going to build her up in that way as I would a peer and my actual sister. And I will also take the responsibility of being her parent and making sure that I offer the correction and consequences. And I love natural consequences as often as I can get them because they're our best teachers. But and always in a way that is going to honor her and not make her feel like that she's a problem or that she's a project or that she was a bad choice, you know, especially when you're handling a child who was adopted or has been orphaned, that you can only imagine the feelings that come with that. And I will never allow myself or anyone else to speak that even further into them, you know, to affirm those feelings, those negative feelings or anything that they are chosen, they are belonging, and that is so crucial and important. And we're able to do that because um, we speak to who they're designed to be, who God sees them as, and I ask God to teach me to see them the way that He sees them, and not the way that I experience them, um, so that I can speak into that and I can call them into that. So,
Thank you. For me, when I heard Father God say to her spirit, I knew you'd be back. I saw in that. I trusted you enough to give you a really, really tough assignment. So in my mind, for Lizzie to be chosen to walk this out and to overcome so much that was no choice of her own, that was chosen by Father God to be put in the biological family, in the adoptive family, for his purposes, to represent him in the earth, to bring the kingdom of God from heaven to earth. Lizzie is destined to bring so much of the kingdom from heaven to earth. And Joy and I feel honored that God has trusted this child to us, mostly to Joy, but it's an honor.
yeah, she's a pretty
And
special kid.
and I've watched her change over the last few years and overcome so many obstacles. And even just this past week, some decisions she's made to, when people were trying to hurt and bully her, she saw, oh, this girl doesn't have enough love. I need to give her a hug. And right in the middle of this child trying to hurt Lizzie, Lizzie goes in and hugs her and says, I love you. And I'm thinking, if she's got that at 11 years old, what will she be like when she's 21? Joy, you want to address the difference when we learn to communicate with her spirit?
Being able to communicate with her spirit opened the door to gentle parenting. That I know that gentle parenting is such a huge fad or whatever you want to call it now. So gentle parenting to me means being able to correct behavior without harsh consequences, without strong reactions, but rather just, hey, we're going to sit down, we're going to talk about this, and we're going to see some changed behavior rather than anything that involves berating or hitting or spanking for that matter. Anything that involved just, oh, I'm going to put you in your place kind of thing. Any kind of anger from me was no longer needed. That I was able to approach her, and actually it was more about me than it was about her because I had a tool in my tool belt to have a different approach. And so with her, when it opened the door to being able to have a conversation that was actually effective, because I could talk to her till I was blue in the face, and there was nothing left to say because I've said it 100 times, and there was still no difference. Then you have to move beyond just talking, because I would often say to her, it's like, well, you can either talk to me or we're going to go straight to consequences. And when talking became effective, because we were able to get to the root of what was causing the issues rather than just dealing with all the symptoms. I felt like I was playing whack-a-mole with my parenting, that I was constantly putting out fires here and there and wherever because I was not dealing with the root of what was happening and what was causing the issues. And so when I'm able to sit down with her and go, how's your spirit? Like, is what's going on in there? And there have been times where she'd be like, well, a tornado just came through and destroyed all of my destroyed my home and everything's all in disarray and all that stuff. And I'm like, that makes sense because your behavior has felt like a tornado lately. And I was like, so what do we need to do about that? And she's like, well, I need to do the work of putting everything back together. And it was more than just talking with her spirit, but it was also giving her a way to verbalize what was going on inside of her, that she was able to finally explain to me in a way that I could understand, in the way that she was understanding, to make sense of it all. That everything was finally able to, oh, so that's what that was, like it was a tornado, and it destroyed my home. And so now I got to go and fix it all. And so she did. And how long it takes to fix something, like that kind of depends on what she needs to go through to do it. And it's a different story every time. But there I remember one time, I forget what the behavior was that led us into the conversation, but she went to find a part of herself that was an infant that hadn't been taken care of. And I think that part of herself from when she was much younger was feeling neglected, and so it was kind of percolating a little bit in her in real life world. And so she went and found the little girl that was hiding behind some rocks. It was like a toddler infant size child. And she picked up the girl and brought her to her home and put her in the nursery of her home and put an angel in charge of taking care of the little girl. And when she was able to do that, she was able to explain to me there was a time in my life where I didn't get what I needed, which makes sense because Lord knows I was a single mom. I was going through a lot, trying to take care of two special needs kids by myself and all that. And to know that there is a way of healing towards beyond that experience. And when she was able to do that, or even with the tornado, that I could see that there was peace again, that she had peace again in her life. And there was comfort for her to know that that part of herself was now being taken care of. And there was comfort for her to know that, yes, this tornado came through and destroyed my world, but I know how to fix it. Like she felt empowered. I know how to fix this. I know how to conquer this. I can do this, because she's seen it and she's seen what she's been able to do and what she's been able to conquer. And really, it's the ease of it has been incredible to me. Just that all I got to do is just go along for the ride, it feels like sometimes. Because being a child, she is so more in tune with her spirit than I am, you know, with my own spirit, with my 45 years of baggage and stuff that I'm dealing with. But to just watch her do what she's doing, and that's one reason why I'm so curious, is because I want to know, like, what are the possibilities? Like, you teach me here, and when I'm curious about it and just asking her, hey, like, what happened there, and she's able to tell me, it's really cool. It's uplifting for her and for me, and it's a really good experience.
So here's a question from Alexis. Do you ever have resistance with her soul and speaking with her spirit? If so, have you figured out why that happens and how do you get back to a place where you can chat again with soul present?
Okay. So here's an interesting concept that we have dealt with her is conscience. Is that conscience is personified in her world. And so she has conscience that sits in the control seat in the control tower, kind of like on the movie Inside Out. And she has conscience that's in control, and conscience sometimes doesn't want to do her job. And so she's like, well, Conscience went to sleep, or Conscience is not around right now. She's off visiting somewhere else. And I'm like, well, I need Conscience in her place where she belongs. Let's put her back where she belongs, and she'll reel her back in and put her back where she belongs. And before you know it, she's off wandered somewhere else. And when Conscience is not in her role doing what she's supposed to be doing, then she makes decisions that are lacking in conscience. And it's been really interesting to see that even though conscience has been resistant to wanting to do what she's supposed to do, she is able to say, hey, it's time to come back. I need you back where you need to be, because her spirit is always willing. It's just her flesh that's a little weak sometimes. And so she'll get conscience back where she belongs, and then conscience might wander off again, but she's always able to bring her back. Now, with my other daughter, she can be a little bit more reserved and shy about talking about her spirit and engaging her spirit sometimes. Like sometimes I feel like she's distracted and she's just not ready to engage. And when that happens, I just give her a little space and then come back again. And normally with her, I don't even have to bring it back up. She will bring it back up when she's ready. And she'll be like, hey, mommy, I'm ready to talk about this now if you want to talk about it. Or please let grandmommy know that we want to talk about it just maybe later tomorrow or something. And she really wants to do it. But sometimes she just needs a little bit of time to warm up to it. So I've experienced more resistance with her than I have with Lizzie. But with Lizzie, yeah, that conscience one, she likes to drop her duty sometimes, and it shows. But she does get right back on gear, and it's so fun because she's able to verbalize what's going on, and put language to it all, to where she can explain, yeah, this is why I made that decision, and it may not have been the best decision in the world, but um, thankfully she's a kid and there's grace for all that. But yeah, she's able to get back on top of it. And as she's gone on since then, Conscience has been more and more fulfilling her role and getting used to that role and things like that, that is not as much of an issue anymore. But yeah, it's been kind of fun dealing with that.
So I think we have shared everything we had in mind to share. Anybody have any questions or comments?
So, how did you find out about conscience?
I just asked her, it's like, what's going on? And she was talking about someone in the driver's seat, and the person that helps her make decisions on what's right and wrong and that kind of thing. I'm like, are you talking about your conscience? And then that's how she got her name and how we labeled her. But she was describing what a conscience does, and she just didn't know the right word for it in the Lizzie real life world. And it just started to click and make all the sense to her. Um, we were talking about what does conscience do? Conscience is kind of responsible for hearing guidance from Holy Spirit. Like what is the right decision here and what is the natural to my God design decision in each moment, and guiding her and directing her. And that connection, that when that is not functioning at full strength, then that's when she ends up having issues with behavior and consequences and things that she's not enjoying. And I'm like, well, if you can just keep conscience where she belongs, then you're going to find yourself having a lot more fun and not having to deal with as many consequences of your decisions. So
So was that a moment when you found out about conscious? Was that a moment where her soul was being resistant, or did you have to wait until her soul wasn't resistant to talk to her about that?
So I think it took a moment of, we got to figure out what's going on.
Can
She
can
was,
I
go ahead,
can
Mom.
I take the way I remember that first time? She had done something totally inappropriate. And the question to her was, why did you do that? Didn't your conscience object to that? And she said, "Oh, I left conscience behind a long time ago."
That's what it was. Yes.
So it kind of came out like conscience got left behind. Okay, we need to find conscience and bring her back.
Yes.
So I guess two questions with that. Well, the first thing is, I know that there's a lot of families that when they try to start to address their child's spirit, um, they might have some immediate, it goes well. And then as they continue to do that with the child starts to not want to talk about it. So have you experienced that with her at all? I mean, you've done a lot of talking with her spirit. It seems like it's a very, very normal thing that you do every day. So is there times when she doesn't want to?
With Lizzie, not very often. I don't have any recollection of her flat out just saying, no, I'm not doing that right now. With little sister, I have experienced that.
Mhm.
Um, she's,
So
I think that has more to do with their natural inclinations. Like Lizzie is a much more people person, and the little sister she is, but in a much different way.
So with
I
little
want,
sister, have you figured out what do you do in those moments? Because you know how effective it is. You know how
Yeah.
effective. So in those moments, do you just kind of stand back and wait for God to, now's the time?
Yeah.
Or do you push, or what do you do?
So with little sister, I talk with mom about it, obviously. And when she is feeling resistant to it in her soul, like in her thoughtful mind and stuff, she's like, I'm too busy playing with my toys. I don't want to go do that right now. Then I could talk with mom, and we've been able to engage her spirit even when we're not involving little sister directly. That we've been able to, and just basically just like, hey, what's going on with you right now? Like what's happening? And I can either get a sense of her spirit and what her response is, or it's, hey, spirit's not really responding to me right now. Spirit's a little distracted herself. And there are times when I see both, and I don't have the desire to push spirit to do anything. I don't feel like I want to violate anything there. But at the same time, I do know that I don't need my daughter sitting in front of me in order to do this, that I
so
can do without that.
let me add to this. When there's an open willingness to talk with the spirit and then it stops, I would suspect an AHS is involved. There's a reason why there's pushback because Normally, the human spirit wants to engage, is designed by God to engage with us. So I don't think it would be a problem directly with the human spirit. It would be some interference. Joy, I
Okay.
know you have to leave here quickly. Do you have any parting words before we go? And then I have something to add. I'll try to do quickly.
I think one of the best pieces of advice that I've taken with this is two things. One, keep God's design in mind, that if you're constantly considering that you're not going to be violating, you're not going to be imposing or anything like that, because you're just calling out the way God designed them. And two is approach it with curiosity. You're not trying to put yourself onto them. You're not trying to make them do something. You're not trying to force them into a certain direction. That if you're coming at it with a position of curiosity, it's like, what is God doing here? And if you see any kind of pushback, it's like, hey, why don't you just ask Jesus? Ask Jesus, what does he want to happen here? And they're able to hear. They're able to make that connection and to ask and find out that answer. So curiosity and keeping God's design in thought.
When you know you're operating out of God's blueprint, God's design for a child, that gives you a lot more authority than you otherwise would have. What does God want in the situation? That always is allowed. We always have permission to do God's will. It's like Peter said, I submit to men, but I obey God. I want to add one little tidbit I just learned last night. And this was about the thalamus. The thalamus is the part of the brain that allows what sensories come in and reach the rest of the brain. It's like the gatekeeper to the senses. And a mom has a little girl who didn't keep anything in order. Everything was everywhere. Her clothes, her toys, always everywhere. She never picked up after herself. She just didn't see the mess. So the mom talked with the girl's spirit and said, would you look at the thalamus and would you please open up the thalamus so the child can see the messes and actually sees their mess. And the spirit did. As of that next day, the child started cleaning up after themselves without being told. Pretty incredible. Okay. Any last minute comment or questions before we go? Okay. Father, go ahead, Alexis.
I think what really stood out to me about your story was how when Jesus would come intervene, he didn't fix everything. He could have. He's the King of Kings. Do whatever he wants. But he didn't. And but when he didn't, there was so much room left for the spirit then to rise and to grow. And I just think that's a beautiful depiction of what it means and how you operate in sonship and how Jesus calls the spirit into sonship. If he just fixed everything, there'd be nothing left. You know, I just think it's a really awesome way that we could even mirror as parents and how we work with our children. And yeah, that just really stood out in your story. And I think a lot of people have that question, why he can, why doesn't he? And I think a lot of times that's one of the reasons is he's calling people higher into their design.
I love that. Yes.
Uh,
Scott.
Joy, I just wanted to say thank you for sharing your story about Lizzie and your relationship. And I mean, it's inspiring and I think gives a lot of hope to other parents out here who have struggles with some of their children. And I just appreciate you being vulnerable with that and sharing all that because it touched me personally and it really means a lot. So thank you.
You're welcome. I
Yeah.
know that this journey is not meant for me alone. That it's not meant for me and my daughters alone, that this is God would not be doing what he's doing if well, he would because he's a good God, but I do believe that he is intending this to be spread, that he is giving us keys that are supposed to be moving out into his kingdom so that we're not the only ones benefiting from what he knows how to do.
I have a
This,
question, Joy. Did you learn to communicate with your spirit first or with Lizzie's spirit first?
honestly, I learned to communicate with theirs. I'll be honest with you. I learned it was so much easier with them than it was with mine. With mine, it was just, there was so much trauma and damage, and I just like, this is just too much. I can't handle this. And so I eventually did get there and moved through to it, but it actually, their spirits encouraged my spirit. You know, that their journey that they shared with me encouraged me, hey, this is something I want for myself, you know? And they were so much more willing, you know, to participate and to accept that this is even possible, you know? And with that, it was encouraging to see that and experience that and to know that this is a good thing, you know, because we have not had anything bad at all come from any of this. You know, that it has all been good. It's all been blessing. It's all been encouragement. Um, it's just been, we've not had anything negative come as a result of any of it, you know, and
So what
just,
advice would you give to someone who needs a little encouragement to try?
one is, I, I be curious, like what are the possibilities? You know, like I felt like I'll admit that I was in a bit of a desperation when I called mom all those years ago. It's like, help me. You know, I've done what I know how to do. You know, I went through training with the foster system. I've seen the way I was raised. I've had a lot of healing in my own personal life. And even with all the tools that I had, I still didn't have what I needed. You know, I had a lot of tools, but they weren't the right tools for what my children needed. And for me, I was willing to step outside of what felt comfortable for me because I'll admit it felt a little uncomfortable at first thinking I'm going to be speaking to their spirits and like I can't just talk to my kid, you know? And but at that point, I had tried everything I knew how to try. And I was like, I'm willing to give this a go. You know, like we're ready for a difference. You know, we keep talking about change. We keep talking about what needs to happen and stuff like that. But nothing I'm doing is making that difference. Nothing my children are doing is making that difference. And it wasn't for lack of want. The kids wanted it. You know, they wanted to not have to be dealing with these behaviors and consequences and feelings and all that stuff that they were having to deal with. They wanted just to be able to relax and enjoy, you know, their childhood, being able to go outside and play instead of having to be stuck with a consequence, you know? And that was just like, yeah, I was like, just if you're at a point where you're willing to try, we've not had anything negative happen from it. And the curiosity of the possibilities. Like I wish I had known that someone else had been through this before and I'd been like, oh man, that worked for you. If it worked for you, it could work for me, you know? And I think that would be amazing. So just accepting that it's possible was enough of an open door to whatever God wanted to do.
Thank you. Thank you, Joy. And please thank Lizzie for allowing us to do this.
I will.
Okay. That's it, guys. See ya. Bye.